host in our email deliverability series. For those of you who missed our previous discussions, every month, Webbula will release a new topic by a guest writer and follow up with a discussion. This is interactive. Anyone who has a question, please feel free to ask in the Q&A below. I'm Jenna, the content marketing manager here at Webbula. I'm your moderator today. With me, we have author of this blog post, Amanda Jackson, email deliverability consultant at Iterable, and special guest Lori Beth Blair, founder of Platonic Ideal. Our topic today is based on Amanda's blog post, IP warming, do it right or do it twice. Before we get to questions, I'd like to hand it over to the author to talk about a little bit about the article and the genesis.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Jackson, and I was just talking to someone about this webinar, telling them what we're going to be discussing today, and they asked the topic. I said IP warming. They just went, "Oh my God, why? Why did you choose that?" It's like, because everyone hates it. It's not fun. Like, there's nothing sexy about that part of the process. You know, if you want to. I know that there are some parts about deliverability that are more fun than others, and this is just a part that I think a lot of people really need to pay more attention to. It's impossible to know everything about it because every situation's different, but I wanted to start out by giving people a foundation, starting with the why. Why is it so important? And, you know, going out from there, helping to build a rough framework, because like I said, every situation is different, and to try to account for everything that could happen during warming, I mean, it's a fool's errand. So the point of this and this conversation really is to start out with the small kernel and to build upon it. I'm sure we'll hit on lots of topics today during our discussion that didn't get to take up space in the article, too complicated or just too wordy or too obscure. But really looking forward to the discussion today and to everyone's questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Lori Beth, what are your thoughts on the article?
I think it's a great article. I think there's some really strong points in there. I think it absolutely is important to start with the why of why you need to warm up. Like, why does it matter? Because your sender reputation matters. And if you come at mailbox providers with a new IP address and they've never heard it, you know, they haven't seen any traffic from it, perhaps in a long time, like you may have a recycled IP. I mean, because there are only so many IPv4s like in the world. But, you know, and especially I think that, you know, it's reasonable to think some mailbox providers actually look at the intersection of like what domain you're sending from and the IP that you're sending from as well, and tracking that kind of reputation. So even if it is a warm IP, you know, even in the case of maybe shared IPs, if you start sending traffic from your domain from a new IP, that's at least going to raise a couple of flags at a lot of spam filters, because they're going to ask why you're doing that. And that's why you have to go kind of slow and low, because whenever you attract the mailbox provider's scrutiny of their spam filter, you've got to be on your best behavior, or they're going to make a negative determination. Your mail starts going into the spam, and then you start circling the drain and go down what I call the deliverability death spiral. And the other thing is, the other point that I would add is if you start sending, you know, if you have a high reputation domain and then you move it to new IPs that have like no reputation, which I would say is probably slightly negative. Would you agree with that, Amanda?
I would. I think a lot of people, I think we have two camps of people. I think we've got the people that discount domain reputation totally, because for so long it wasn't a major focus of major providers. And then the other camp of, you know, those that do take that into consideration, but maybe put a little too much emphasis on it, get a little overly confident when they start out thinking, oh, well, the domain will help, without without really stepping back and thinking about what that means.
Yeah, the other side of that coin can be, and I've seen this happen before, is if you have a high reputation domain and you get a brand new IP and you start just pushing massive volume and the mailbox providers don't like it, they start junking that IP, right? that can actually drag your domain reputation down, because that's increasing the aggregate amount of spam to a platform that you're sending to any given mailbox provider that's going in the spam folder. And that increases the confirmation bias of that spam filtering algorithm, that's where your traffic belongs from your, either based on the content fingerprint or the domain ID and the IP, like it's all interrelated. And it, doesn't, like if you tie an anchor to one of the, like they're all chained together. And if one of them starts getting dragged down, guess what? Everything else is going with it.
For sure.
So someone mentioned slow and low. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, basically it's, honestly, it's as simple as it sounds. It's starting out slow and and low. So you want to take a low volume and start sending that out slowly. And so I guess slow really refers to the entire process of warming, how you start out. You don't want to, like Lori Beth mentioned earlier, you don't want to just blast out all this volume from day one, or even when you get out towards the end of your plan. You need to keep things consistent. And so slow and low is honestly just kind of a catchy way to remember how to approach it. Low volume, slow increases, whether that's double day over day, or if you want to be really conservative and like 1.5 times the previous day's volume day over day, or 1.25, and just continue approaching it in that manner. And it's not foolproof, because, as the article says, and as we'll discuss, I'm sure, that there are a lot of speed bumps along the way, but that's one of the best ways to set yourself up for success. So
yeah, so I would say, slow and low, that's like a terminology we're borrowing from cooking, which is near and dear to my heart. A lot of people may not know. I am a chef school dropout. I actually attended chef school briefly after getting my first bachelor's degree, and ultimately decided it wasn't for me. But, the reason you do something slow and low is because at the end of the process, it produces a superior product. Because say, for example, I love to make barbacoa. So I'll give you all my barbacoa recipe.
Ooh.
So we're gonna double up the education here. So when I make a barbacoa, I get the chuck roast, right? And chuck roast, if you just throw that sucker in like a saute pan and just hit it with the high heat, and it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be too tough to eat. You got to cook it slow and low, so that the connective tissue that breaks down and then actually creates this lovely sauce that's very rich and full bodied and everything. And that's the same with the IP warming. If you just try to open, the floodgates, you just try to set it to max heat and cook the thing, cook your IP, it's going to be hammered. It's going to be tough. And it's not going to be palatable to mailbox providers. They're going to be like, nope, tasted that, don't like it. You tried to shove 50 pieces, you tried to stuff my mouth full of it, and I'm not into that. So they'll start rejecting you. And again, the title of the article, I would almost even say, do it right or do it twice. Do it right or do it forever. Because you can get stuck in an IP warm up forever if you don't get it done at least once right. And I think there's an excellent point at the end of the article that even says, just because you're done warming doesn't mean you're done doing the monitoring and maintaining your engagement and all of that stuff. Very true, because IPs, if you don't send from them, they can go cold. If you don't maintain the engagement and you don't keep your data clean, etc., even on a warm IP, you can pull it down to low where you have to rewarm it. So it's kind of a continual process, but it's, you got to put the simple ingredients together and do slow and low. And honestly, as far as starting volumes, I see someone ask that question. To me, it depends, and that's the ultimate deliverability answer. It always depends. It's going to depend on a little bit. So are you migrating from an existing platform? What is your current volume of email? that you're migrating over to, new IPs. And what is the reputation of that domain? Like if you're a consumer sender, how is your reputation at Gmail, right? Like if you have a high reputation at Gmail, you could probably start out at a little bit higher volume. You could probably start out at, maybe, I don't know, 250 Gmail today, at least per day, at least 100, right, on day one. But if you have a bad, or if you have like a medium or a low reputation, I don't know, you probably need to do like 50 or 25 or something like that. Your volume, because the domain reputation is still going to factor into that somewhat, at least at Gmail, which if you're a consumer sender is probably around 50% of your list. So yeah, it depends. And also how many buckets you want to divide things into depends as well, based on how big, your list is and how many impactful providers there are for you. So like, usually I do a Gmail bucket and then all the free Microsoft emails that I call Hotmail, which is Hotmail and Outlook and Live and MSN, and then Yahoo, and then AOL bucket. And then I put everything else, all the like regional providers, like in a fourth or fifth bucket, depending. Sometimes I group Yahoo and AOL if it's a smaller customer. If it's a larger customer, like, that's sending like 1 billion a month or something, I will actually not group it. I'll split out AOL from Yahoo. So there's a lot of decisions you have to make. And ultimately, it depends on how much traffic you're trying to move off of one IP and onto another, or a group of IPs as well, if you're warming a whole group at the same time. But
Yeah. And that's one thing that I do think is cool about IP warming, is that you can make it as complicated as you want. Like you said, working in the different buckets, you generally will get a better result from that. It requires a lot more time. It requires a lot more expertise, more sophisticated platform tools, but it can absolutely be done in chunks, just with your whole audience. But that's really when you want to be more conservative. And I see from the comment here that there are some recs to start as low as 50. I've absolutely created warming plans that start at 50 and go to 100, 200, 400. I find that that's easier for people that really have no experience with warming. Like I said, you can make it as complicated as you want, and the lift is a little too much for someone that doesn't have that background, that frankly doesn't have the time to set everything up for the different buckets, for the in-depth monitoring. Although that's best practice, I understand that not everyone is set up with that expanse of tooling and resources.
for sure.
And the follow-up was, how large of a decrease in sends can result in your IP being cold? Again, I hate to say it, but it depends. Generally speaking, you don't want to go without sending for a month. Like a month is way too long. But generally, I would say try to maintain consistent volume, at least 1 send a week. 3 is optimal, but again, it depends, because it depends on your audience and your industry and what people are used to and those expectations. So, I will say that's when it's really, when you get into the weeds like this, is when it's really helpful to be working with a consultant like myself, Lori Beth. Bring in experts to help, because it really is a really important task, arguably the most important of your email program.
Do it forever.
Yeah. So I would say, honestly, what I would say is, so I think the way that a lot of the filtering algorithms work, and I've more seen this kind of at Gmail, the way that I think about it is, it's email reputation kind of works like consumer credit. Mm-hmm. In that there is like your actual credit rating, right? There's like, good, bad, good, medium, low, bad, as far as Google Postmaster tools will tell you. But there's the component they don't show you, and often you don't know until you check it, is what is your credit limit? You can know what your credit rating is. Like, so if you're checking, if you have your IPs set up to monitor on certain platforms, that'll give you like a determination of like, okay, your IP is like, 99 out of 100 juicy goodness points, however they come up with that. And, things, or, the IP can have ratings from various different like reputation monitoring platforms, but there's also like how much volume can you send? And what I would say is the path of least resistance that I've found to the inbox is sending a consistent daily volume. Like honestly, sending your volume, evening it out about as much as you can, is going to be your path of least resistance. Now, granted, that doesn't always make sense for every business, but what I would say is, as soon as you stop sending, I would assume platforms are tracking things like, okay, what's your average monthly volume? What's your average weekly volume? What's your average daily volume? I mean, they probably look at it like, past average last 30 days, average last 7 days, et cetera. So if you slow down, if you decrease the volume on an IP asset, that's effectively going to erode your credit limit at the mailbox providers. Like it's going to start probably, I would say within like a week or something, you're going to start eroding. But, so it's all about how much you bring that volume back up. If you try to, if you go from sending, I don't know, 1 million a week and then drop down for several weeks to like 500,000, you're going to need to warm that IP back up. Like but I would definitely say, yeah, what Amanda said, if you don't send for like a whole month, that IP is going to start getting really cold. I want to say what I've heard before when I've had clients in like really bad situations where maybe Gmail is just wholesale blocking their IP, doesn't like it. It can be like 2 months before that reputation resets enough to start rewarming that asset. And I would say by month 4, I would say probably most of whatever positive or negative reputation you have on IP is probably pretty thoroughly like a distant memory for most mailbox providers, because they do, I would say, in the spam filter, they're always trying to keep ahead of trends, right? So they're going to, trends as far as cybersecurity trends, what kind of malicious emails are being populated in the ecosystem. But yeah, I would say, it's going to erode pretty quickly if you don't keep it warm. And while it's important to not fatigue your email list, like that's more about not continue. And Amanda addresses that in the article as well. It's more about not continuing to hammer people that aren't engaging with you. Because if you're hitting lots of inactive people in your files, then that is going to cause you problems.
So let's move to another question. Would you follow these same procedures for domain warming? We want to take
Generally
that.
speaking, like I said before, I tend to be a more conservative warmer. If working with someone that was a little more seasoned in warming and that had gone through the process before, I would maybe say you can be a bit more aggressive, but if the person or if the team that I was working with on a warming had never gone through a warming process before and I had to explain to them what we're doing, I don't think I would give them the wiggle room to do it, honestly. I don't think I would clear them for that. As Lori Beth said earlier, domains, I mean, they carry their own reputation too. And if you're starting out from square one with a domain as well, of course you want to attack it the same way. But the difference is if you're warming a domain, you also want to look at what's going on with the IP too. And so I'm going to assume the question kind of goes on beyond that there's a more thoughtful reason behind the question, that adding a domain could be a subdomain. So if you're adding a new subdomain to existing IPs that have been warmed, then yeah, that's when the if would apply, that you could be a little more aggressive. You probably don't want to just because again, this is really the time that you need to take to do things correctly and slowly and methodically. And I can't think of too many compelling reasons why you wouldn't want to apply the same thoughtfulness to warming a domain as you would an IP.
Okay. Lori,
Yeah.
Beth, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say it's very fundamentally the same methodology. Like fundamentally, it's the same methodology, slow and low. Like, and I think there are some different considerations. There's probably kind of a grid, like as far as, okay, is this a new domain on warm IPs? Is this a, warm domain on a new IP that has no reputation? Is this a warm domain, or is this a brand new domain and a brand new IP, or at least brand new subdomain even, right? Like, is it and to use the answer, the perennial deliverability answer, it does depend, because it's also going to depend, okay, you made a new subdomain, how quickly you can warm that up is probably going to depend on somewhat the reputation of the parent domain. If the parent domain reputation, and the other thing is this too, it's important to recognize that different mailbox providers put more and less importance on the domain reputation. Like, I would personally say Gmail, they put a lot of importance on the domain reputation. That, I mean, I've seen IPs matter not as much, which isn't to say IPs never matter, because I've definitely seen instances where I had a client with a high domain reputation, but they were on a shared pool of IPs, and some of those shared IPs had bad reputations, and that email absolutely went to spam at Gmail. Like, the reputation of the IP was bad enough to drag a high domain email into the spam folder. So it certainly can happen. But yeah, I definitely think it's slow, low, especially if you're in the situation where you're like, okay, I'm going with a new subdomain, I'm going on like a new IP or IPs. You got to go real slow and low in that case, and you've got to pay a lot of attention to the engagement you're getting back, like daily. And even I like making like kind of daily adjustments to warming plans, at least the first several days, like assuming my sender is sending every day, which is typically what I advise, to just like flatten out your deployments. Like, so for example, if normally you send a weekly newsletter, right? And let's just say, it only makes sense for you to send Monday through Friday, and that newsletter is 50,000 people. Like, start, low, maybe with like 1,000 total people across all different mailbox providers, and then ramp that up, and maybe you can get to your 50,000 by the end of the week. Maybe you can get to it. But if not, you just kind of keep flattening out that deployment. And even when you're up and running, honestly, I really advise people to use all of their available sending days. Like, if you're a business that only sends one newsletter of 50,000, one day a week, spread that out so it's 10,000 a day. That's going to be way more digestible to mailbox providers. And if you want to get on some even more next level stuff, track send time optimization, track what day and what hour of the week people are opening, and launch the email around that. Like, so, have your Monday group, your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday group, like whatever,
Okay. So if you're migrating from one ESP to another, how long will it take to reach parity? Who wants to take that one?
I can jump on that one first, because I got a real easy answer. It depends. It depends. I'm just going to keep going back to that, but it depends on how much volume you're trying to get up to, right? Like, I've done migrations for senders that were pumping like 1 billion emails a month, and those take a while. They take longer than you think it's going to take, because I'll never hesitate to drop my favorite boxing quote from the great Mike Tyson: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I will say, IP warmings, domain warmings, rewarmings, migrations, they all love to punch. They're all throwing punches at your face, and there's a chance you're going to catch one. So, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And yeah, so it depends. What volume are you trying to get up to? What is the distribution of your list? Are you 45% Gmail, or are you 70% Gmail? Because I've seen that from some providers, like people in the like career board space, really high distribution of Gmail users. People in the crypto space, really high distribution of Gmail users, things like that. So, if your list is skewed toward one provider, that's going to be like your limiting factor, right? Because you can't you have to control volume to that provider. So, there's a lot of factors it depends on. And I think it's all about mapping out things like, okay, what is my average traffic per day, week, month? Like, how can I spread that out over, the available sending days? And also, yeah, how much effort, how many resources do you have to throw at it? Because I believe, as Amanda was saying, like, you can finesse a warm up to the like nth degree. You can put an infinite amount of effort into it. It's a question of, what is the business value? How much is enough to get what you need without wasting your resources?
I know that there's a lot of pressure, especially when migrating ESPs, to get up and running as quickly as possible. A lot of people wait until the end of one contract to migrate into the other, which is a whole, that could be its own webinar as to why that's not a good idea. But stakeholders always want to know, okay, when are we gonna see rates like we were seeing at our previous ESP? And honestly, going back to the credit analogy, which is, I think, a really good one and really apt here, bringing in the idea of credit history into the picture too. Like on your previous ESP, let's say that you've been sending on it for 5 years. You have 5 years of history that all these mailbox providers are pulling from and able to see how you've behaved during that time. And all of a sudden you're essentially starting from square one. Let's just say you've got a new sending domain, new IPs, you're starting all over again. People forget that it took time to get to the kinds of metrics that they were seeing at the old ESP. They didn't just start getting, performing super well there. There were those growing pains, of course. And so I try to remind people that reaching parity shouldn't be your ultimate goal in warming. It should be establishing that reputation, making it to the inbox, and getting positive engagement. And then once you're able to do that, that's really when you maintain and you build, and eventually, assuming you follow best practices, then eventually you will probably reach parity. But again, there's so many factors at play.
I mean, maybe
it's hard to guarantee it, is what I'm saying.
I mean, maybe you can even do better too. Like you should always be testing into superior performance. And honestly, what I would say is there's an excellent point in the article, and I'm trying to remember which bullet it's under, but basically, point number 3, audience recommended to clean your list before warming. And I think in a lot of cases, warming is usually happening because there is a migration at play, right? Mm-hmm. So absolutely, I would say I would add a little to that and say, yeah, make sure, plan ahead. Make sure you get all of your unsubscribes out of your previous platform. And honestly, not only do you need to get them out of the previous platform before you start sending on the new one, you actually need some kind of process to transfer them from the old platform for like 60 days after you stop sending from it to the new platform. You actually need to get your unsubscribes from your old vendor, which is, as Amanda said, absolutely don't expect to switch flip, because it doesn't work like that. It's more of a slider kind of scale, like where you slowly bleed volume over from the old platform to the new platform. And there are things you need to do beforehand, like get all your unsubscribes, get all of your undeliverables, like anything that you're, that's on your suppression list from your ESP. So yeah, I think that's the important one.
Are there any external factors that, affect the IP or domain warmup? I mean, there's probably a ton of them again.
Yeah, and a lot of them are unique to the sender, to the plan. One of the ones that I thought of initially was time of year. I've managed IP warmings during the holidays, and that is the first thing I would tell somebody is don't do it unless you unless you're absolutely being forced to. Providers scrutinize senders so much more heavily from, I would even argue, mid to late September, definitely October through winter time. And warming can already be an uphill battle for some, especially if there are pressures to include certain certain volumes, certain segments.
I'd argue it's always an uphill battle, because
Yeah.
I think spam filters are inherently predisposed to looking at an email and going, that's spam, because that's their job. Because a lot of email that gets pumped out is spam and scam. There's
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, you don't even realize how much your mailbox provider, Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, Proofpoint, your spam filter, I think a lot of people don't realize how much crap those systems are shielding you from. So, these filters are already predisposed to go, this is spam. And I 100% agree. I think the spam filters get a lot tighter during the kind of consumer feeding frenzy that is Q4.
Yeah.
And even starting into like Q3, like even, September, even starting into Q3, but definitely Q4. Don't do a warm up during Q4. That's a bad idea. I've done it before and it's painful.
Yeah, and stakeholders always want to go back as far back as they can because it's the holidays. People want these coupons, want the deals, but that is completely opposite of what you should be doing when warming. So that,
it's not just trying to do a warm up during Q4 is not just an uphill battle. It's like trying to ice skate uphill. Like it's extra hard. It's extra difficulty mode. So if you want to do that to yourself, more power to you, but I don't recommend it either.
Yeah.
Lori Beth, here's a question for you. How can you determine open time in the age of Apple MPP?
So I think in a way we kind of have to proxy it a little bit, the same way that opens are always proxies, to the fact that mailbox providers don't directly give us this information. I think your open tracking pixel, your reporting system should at this point be able to kind of separate off those MPP opens. And then you're left with, the rest of everything, right? So your Gmail opens, you got anything that's not going through, the mail privacy protection servers, right? So I think you kind of proxy it similar to how you use, similar to how, at least this is how I've always done it when tracking complaint rate. You track it at Microsoft and Yahoo and AOL. Well, I mean, you can track complaint rate at Gmail, but you can't figure out who complained. So if you're trying to track, okay, what data sources, what segments are my complaints coming from, you kind of have to proxy that with, providers that actually have feedback, traditional feedback loops that tell you who complained, right? So I think it's similar to that. I think you kind of proxy it. I think you essentially filter out the Apple Mail opens, and then you analyze what data is left and apply that kind of to the greater set, which isn't to say it's probably not 100% accurate, because it's certainly possible. One thing that I've kind of looked at over time is that behavior of subscribers may actually vary demographics may vary even by mailbox provider. So for example, I was working with a women's clothing brand that targeted women like mostly 55 and older. And we actually, when I looked at revenue per email, AOL addresses were actually our most profitable email addresses. They made more revenue per email sent than Gmail, than Hotmail, than Yahoo. So I definitely do think there are demographic differences. So it's going to be imperfect, but you can get reasonably statistically close, I would say, by just segmenting out those Apple opens and analyzing what's left.
Awesome. So we are gonna start up with final thoughts. Lori Beth, I want to start with you and end with Amanda since she is the author. So yeah, final thoughts, wrap up.
Yeah, totally. I think Amanda has some just absolutely great points in here and a great methodology to follow. Monitor. I think monitoring, we haven't really talked about that a lot. It's super important. Monitor, your open and click rates. Like and your complaint rates and your unsubscribe rates. Monitor what's going on there. In your ESP, if you have additional monitoring platforms like inbox placement. Now that is something you want to be careful with, especially while you're warming up, because if you're on day one and you're sending 50 Gmails, like you're starting on 50 Gmails, you don't want to send to a fat seed list that's got like 20 Gmails that are guaranteed not to engage. Like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to water down and dilute your engagement like that. So, you need to warm for a few days. And then once you get up to like a reasonable volume where, the 20 seeds per mailbox provider are not going to be that dilutive to your engagement, then you can inbox placement test and adjust. But you definitely, especially in the early days of an IP warming, you don't want to over test the IP, because that's going to look sketchy to mailbox providers. It's going to look like, okay, are you trying to probe my spam filter and figure something out, right? And I don't like that as a spam filter, so I'm just going to say no, and just potentially damage the IP. But yeah, I would say that, and definitely preparing, setting, if you're the boots on the ground and you have executives pressuring you to reach parity with the previous platform, to pump, hit volume by a certain date, I think it's important to kind of set their expectations lower, probably, and be like, hey, this is going to be a process. We've got to listen to the data signals that we're getting back. And that's ultimately going to determine the velocity we can move at. So if consumers love what you're doing, you can hit the gas, at least at Gmail. That's what I found. If consumers are engaging with what you're doing, you're getting more positive engagement versus your negative engagement. I think that's another really good thing that Amanda talks about in the blog too, is like, okay, these are, types of positive engagement. These are types of negative engagement. And my final thought on this is I really like her line in here, just because you're finished warming up to your high volume doesn't mean mailbox providers aren't still holding you to a higher level of scrutiny. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think the higher you go in volume, the more true that is. Like, if you're a billion a month sender, like, they're going to be way less forgiving with your complaint rate that they tolerate, just due to the sheer volume you're pushing and the amount of impact you can have on their user experience with their platform. Because ultimately, that's what they're trying to protect. Like, the spam filter is there to protect and curate the Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo user experience. And if, the mailbox provider feels you're doing something that risks a bad user experience, they're probably going to throw it into the spam. But yeah, I think that definitely, especially if you're on a newer IP or an IP that's been cold for a long time, or even just the fact, you're sending from this domain, from this IP for a shorter amount of time, you're gonna see increased scrutiny for a period of time. So you got to be, you got to come correct.
Thank you, Lori Beth. Amanda?
Well, the second thing I would like people to take away from this, beyond just the pithy low and slow, is be consistent. Lori Beth was saying earlier, really one of the best ways to be successful in warming is to keep that volume consistent. In your patterning, you want to smooth it out as much as possible. That's also the case in just the actions that you're taking. During warming, you are going to get rate limited. You are going to go to the spam folder starting out. These are all normal things that a sender will encounter when warming, because there's no reputation to help them through. Mailbox providers are looking at you with fresh eyes. You have to build that trust. And so just because you may encounter some of these bumps along the way, don't stop. Take a step back, look at your overall metrics, keep going. If you continue to see larger issues, or if they start to compound, that's when you want to take a step back and pivot, and when you're going to get punched in the face by, so to speak. It's all part of the normal process. Listen to the data, really take in what it's telling you. Look at as many data points as you can, monitoring systems, and be ready to make small adjustments, like was mentioned earlier, and keep going and continue to pivot and to make these small adjustments. That would be my way to sort of tie everything together, that it's not going to be perfect. Assuming you're following those best practices and you continue to pivot and you're flexible in your plan, you will get there. You'll eventually reach parity.
And call Lori, Beth, or Amanda if you have any trouble in this process. Thank you to both for joining me today. You will actually see both of them again in September. Lori Beth will be writing for us about bounces. Join me next month with Della Quest as he discusses subject lines with Andrew Kordick. That blog will be live in a couple weeks. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today.
Thank you.